Hi everyone, this is the Research Like a Pro question and answer series. Today I'll be sharing understanding meanings in historical documents. This is an excerpt from our recent Research Like a Pro office hours in our online course, and so you'll see that we're talking about analysis of documents as one of the lessons in the Research Like a Pro course. And in the office hours, I do a tip every month that goes along with that month's theme. And so in this video, we'll talk a little bit about using artificial intelligence to help when we can't understand a meaning right away, and then going to find sources that back up what AI has told us. And I'll go through some of the different aspects of understanding meanings so we can get some ideas for what we need to understand in our genealogical research. I hope this video is helpful to you, and we'll see you next week. Today, our tip is going to be about understanding meanings in historical documents. And as I said in the email message I sent out for this month's newsletter, we often focus a lot on analyzing sources as far as we apply the labels to them. What kind of source do we have? Is it original, derivative, or authored? What kind of information do we have? Primary, secondary, or unknown? And what kind of evidence is it? Direct, indirect, or negative evidence? But if we go beyond those, we can think of some additional things to analyze. And often it comes up in our research where we have a phrase or a word that we don't really understand. And if we would look into that, we could understand the meaning of it and help us to gain better understanding of the historical document. So, of course, we will encounter archaic terminology the further back we go in time, words and phrases that aren't used anymore. And sometimes we need to use old historic dictionaries or glossaries to help us with that. Also, obscure abbreviations. Often you'll see words abbreviated in historical documents that we're not used to and they're unfamiliar to us. Also, cultural references. Sometimes we will not understand something that maybe refers to like an actress of the time or a historical event that we didn't know about. And sometimes we ignore those, but if we do, we can miss valuable context that help us understand. So, um, looking at the understanding meanings standard, which is standard number 24 in the BCG genealogy standards, that is what it talks about, is that genealogists understand these meanings. So one category of things we might need to understand are medical terms. And as we all know, medical vocabulary has evolved over time. And this can be challenging, especially when we're trying to transcribe a doctor's handwriting and we can't understand his words because they're not familiar to us and his handwriting is bad. So that could be a challenge. And so understanding common historical terms can help us, like consumption and knowing that that means tuberculosis and dropsy. And sometimes you can get like medical dictionaries from the time period. And so how can we understand all these different kinds of terms? Well, what I'm going to get to is that sometimes a way to better understand these is to use artificial intelligence, which are trained on texts from many time periods, and a lot of medical and legal jargon can be easier explained by using AI. Some more terms that we might need help with are legal terms. Historical terminology like fee simple, dower rights, messuage, and other things had specific meanings that we can look up in Black's Law Dictionary, and we can use AI tools to help explain what the meaning of these terms are. And this helps us get better accuracy in our research and understand when additional records could be found based on, like if we find out that someone died intestate and there was an administration, often a deed will point us to the administration of an estate where somebody died without a will. Okay, so here's an example of a document from 1717. Actually, this one's from 1715, and it's in Isle of Wight County, Virginia. And a lot of the time in the past, there will be various abbreviations that we need to figure out. So like, for example, in parish registers, this is a deed, but in parish registers, they would use a lot of abbreviations like OB for obit, which is died in Latin, and things like that. This deed has the abbreviation said over and over as SD. And a lot of times you'll see other shorthands for government records to save space. And when I come across something that I can't figure out, especially while transcribing, I will use an AI tool to help decode that. And um, so, for example, in this, at the bottom right, you'll see highlighted the word parish. And this took a while to figure out because it just looks like a strange letter P with an E maybe at the top and then ISH. But what I figured out is that the R is being superscripted and its abbreviation PRISH for parish. And this is used over and over. And also, another common abbreviation or unfamiliar word in this document is the use of the thorn for THE. And the thorn looks kind of like a Y or a P, um, but and then also the E is superscripted, so it really looks strange. And it actually is often transcribed as ye, as in ye old curiosity shop and things like that. But it really should be transcribed as the, because when we transcribe old words like this, we should use the modern equivalent. So we don't usually use the thorn anymore. So we should use the TH, which is the sound it makes to get the. So other types of archaic language we might encounter are words like relict, consort, issue. All of these should be defined so we can look them up in historical dictionaries and things. Also, spelling variations. These are super common in historical documents, and as genealogists, you all know that. Sometimes we get hung up on trying to figure out the correct spelling, but then even within one deed or document, you might see multiple spellings of the same name. And that's just due to a lack of standardization at the time. And so let's look at some examples of spelling and terms that are spelled different or need to be defined. In this deed, we have the name Margaret spelled with two T's, a little different, and I have seen the spelling in the past a few times. We also have the word co-heirs, which isn't a term that we use anymore, but just meaning that they're both inheriting from their father together. And the next part of the deed had a bunch of different words, some insealing, paid. I didn't highlight all of these, but let me see if I can show them. So here's some, and it's spelled with an E, and this person's E is always looking like a backwards E. And they spell some like this every time in this deed. And then we have insealing. And so instead of saying signing and sealing and delivering the deed, it says insealing and delivery of these presents. And then it says reception instead of receipt, how you would see in a normal, like with the deeds that I'm used to, say receipt. So you can see here, paid is spelled with a Y, and then well and truly paid, the reception hereof, and said Madison Street. Anyway, so these words are unfamiliar. So one thing we can do is take the phrase and say, what does this mean in a 1715 deed from Virginia? And then I quoted it. In consideration of the sum of 2,100 pounds of tobacco to them in hand at and before the insealing and delivery of these presents by the said Johnson, well and truly paid, the reception that hereof they, the said Madison Street and Margaret his wife and Anne Serby and Sarah Serby, doth hereby acknowledge. Specifically, what does insealing mean? And this is ChatGPT 04 Mini High, the latest model, and it's a thinking model. So instead of answering right away, it reasons, it looks for information online, it gives you sources. And this one says, in early modern English deeds, insealing is simply the act of affixing the mandatory seal to the parchment. And so then it quotes the phrase that I gave it and says that this means that the tobacco was paid at or before the sealing or insealing and delivery of the deed. So basically, the grantors are acknowledging that they received the tobacco, which was the payment for the land. So that was helpful. And then, oh, and by the way, the link here goes to a modern version of Black's Law Dictionary, which didn't actually say insealing. It just said sealing, but it was helpful to see the definition of sealing from the Black's Law Dictionary. And then I said, what about the word recepn? Reception. It definitely doesn't look like receipt, which is what I was thinking it would be. And so it talks about how in early modern deeds, you'll very often see reception as a scribal abbreviation for reception, the act of receiving, which in context means receipt. So it does mean well and truly paid and the receipt of that payment. And then it talks about how scribes routinely dropped the TION and or turned it into PN in words like reception. And so in this deed where so many things were abbreviated down to parish, said, and even reception, it made sense that the scribe was dropping the TION. So how does ChatGPT know this information? Does it know this? Is it making this up? Is this correct? So in the previous one, we can look at the sources. This one didn't give me a source, so I would probably want to take this information and go search for a source. I could even click the button for web search and have it search for a source that talks about this to see if it's accurate. We do want to check the work of the AI, but how it might know this is by reading a lot of text online, and it's been trained on all kinds of words and phrases and documents, and so it's kind of like asking your assistant who's read all of the things online from the 1700s that have been transcribed if they've ever seen this, and they say, yeah, I've seen that. So speaking of paying for something with tobacco, sometimes we need to understand different monetary systems, and we might see unfamiliar currency that we've never seen before, making it hard for people to interpret, and various regional differences in currency systems can also add complexity, but we can use AI to help us with that. Another thing is monetary systems. So, currency conversion, also thinking about economic circumstances. Um, when we're looking at tax records like this and trying to figure out the economic conditions our ancestor faced at that time, we can sometimes get a little lost in what does all this mean? What are all these numbers? So that's another important thing we need to try to learn about and try to understand. Well, one thing I do like to do is figure out the purchasing power and see what they could buy with their money, as far as like what was the average wage for the year and that kind of thing. And even beyond that, we have historical measurements. And if you've ever come across a deed that has rods, chains, perches, gills, these are not common today. So we have to try to figure out what that means and decipher that to help us understand the size of their land, building dimensions, and other things. AI can help us. In the past, they said AI was not good at math, but now the newer models are good at math, so we can still use them now. Another thing to understand in documents are the historical dates, like the Julian and the Gregorian calendars. Sometimes you'll see in European church records regnal years. So it'll say in the 5th year of the reign of King George, and then you have to figure out what year that was. Sometimes they'll also reference feast days and religious calendars. And then if you've done a colonial research in the US, you'll see the double dating of documents. So sometimes we'll see the year 1752/3, or the double dating. And so, what does all that mean? I like to ask AI to give me kind of get me started. So, I know I've heard presentations in the past about the Julian and Gregorian calendars, but I just asked ChatGPT, what is the, or actually Gemini, what is the minimum I need to know about this for my genealogical research? And it ended up giving me more than I needed, but it was helpful. It was bullet pointed, so it was easier to understand. And it talked about the Julian calendar, but how it was a little off and had too many minutes per year. And so the calendar started to drift. And so they introduced the Gregorian calendar. And then the bottom of the answer it gave me, here's what you would need to know. There's the old style and the new style calendar. And in the 1500s and into the 1700s, different countries were going through the shift from the old calendar to the new calendar. And so some days were skipped because some people just went, like one country just went directly from October 4th to October 15th or something because they wanted to catch up with the new calendar. So things like this are important for us to understand if we're researching in countries at that time period. So that is one thing we can get from AI as far as understanding dates. And finally, all of this helps us to understand the context in historical documents. So even if there isn't a term, a medical or legal phrase that we don't understand, it's still helpful to dig into the historical context. And AI can help us with that too. Um, the historical events that shaped the creation of the document help understand what the document means. And often religious practices and beliefs influenced the documents, especially those church records we're looking at. So understanding the context of that religion can help us. And social customs can help as well. And AI can help with all of this. So hopefully the takeaway here is that sometimes understanding the meanings of words and phrases and historical context can be a challenge. AI is a tool that can get us to additional sources to help us understand them and give us clues to guide us. So hopefully that will help you as you're analyzing your documents and trying to understand them. And in the Research Like a Pro process, we do this analysis in multiple places in the process during the timeline creation when we're analyzing our starting point, and then also during our research as we follow the research plan and we find new evidence and information. So it's an important skill to do.